Dead Sea there. And the Dead Sea sits in a geological rift, okay, that we call the Great Syro-African Rift, or at least in the Middle East, it's called the Jordan Rift. And that rift is a deep crack in the earth that goes way up here in Syria, comes down, and the Sea of Galilee is actually located at 700 feet below sea level in the rift. The Jordan River is in the rift, and the Dead Sea is in the rift at a surface level of 1,300 feet below sea level. This is sea level here. This is 1,300 feet lower. So that if you're coming from the Mediterranean Sea, and here's sea level, then you get the land. The land of Israel rises up from the sea kind of like this, going from west to east, you know. Low hills, high hills, Jerusalem, and then it drops to pretty low level, and then it comes up again like this. And you're over here, and here's Amman, Jordan, over there. And so you got the Dead Sea down here at 1,300 feet, where this is Mediterranean sea level. And Jerusalem is here about 2,700 feet above sea level. So when you go from Jerusalem, as we have said before, you go down, whether you're going west or east. West is a little bit less steeply down. East is immediately down. And if you're driving in a vehicle from Jerusalem down to Jericho, which sits on a plateau at about 800 feet below sea level, you're making a trip of, 3,500 feet in elevation in a 20-minute space of time. And what happens as you're driving from Jerusalem to Jericho is what happens when you're on an airplane and it's descending to make a landing. Your ears start to feel the pressure build up because you're going down. And those of you who've been there are all nodding your head. Yeah, we've had that a couple of times. One of us on it over to Jericho. And it's really an interesting thing. When Nephi says we did go down into the wilderness, yeah, going down into the wilderness. Because what happens is that the weather systems all come in, from the Mediterranean, and they come in here and they hit the land and they drop their rain on the hills, and then they will skip over the Jordan Valley and then reform and rain on the Amman Plateau. But they don't rain in this area, and we call that phenomenon rain shadow. Okay? And what happens then is that while this side of the land is green and verdant in Israel, the hill country of Judah, beautiful as you're going, say, from Jerusalem to Hebron, or you're going down to Shephelah, you visit Lachish, Marishah, you visit in the spring, it's like Ireland, just as green as can be, millions of beautiful wildflowers, everything. But you go on this side and it's brown, it's desert, because it gets very, very little rain. Jerusalem's going to get, 3 inches of rain a year. Jericho's going to get 2 inches of rain a year. It's like Cairo, nothing. And so this is why that's all light colored right there east of Jerusalem, which is right there where the dot is. That's the wilderness. That's the desert. Okay? And you're going down into it. Now Lehi's trail to the Red Sea would have been from Jerusalem here to the Red Sea there at the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay? It wouldn't have been, down to here, where you'd have had to cross over the Sinai, and that's rather rugged. And it wouldn't have been over here to the Gulf of Suez, or you're not going into the wilderness here, you're going through the green land, to get to the Sinai. You're going straight into the Judean wilderness and coming south of the Dead Sea through that valley that we call Arabah, and you're coming to the Red Sea, Gulf of Elah. And then what happens is when you leave the Valley of Lemuel, which was along here somewhere, you move south-southeast, because Nephi tells you you're going south-southeast. You can't come to any other point on the Red Sea and go south-southeast. It has to have been somewhere on the east shore of the Gulf of Aqaba for Lehi then to say, or Nephi to say, then their journey went south-southeast through Arabia. Okay, question?
This is kind of off topic, but do they know where Sodom and Gomorrah was?
Yeah, well, people think they do. And there are two places that people speculate. One is that it was located under the shallow pan at the south end of the Dead Sea, and it's been encrusted over by salt for 3,000 years, or 4 even, because Abraham lived in the Middle Bronze Age, so that's closer to 2,000 than 1,000. There's a new set of archaeological studies, also based on some evidences in the biblical text, that suggests that they were at the north end of the Dead Sea and would be an early Bronze Age tell, maybe on the east side of the Jordan River. And that's actually an intriguing concept. I'm not sure I'm convinced, but I'm keeping an eye on it. Time will tell. Other questions before we go on? Okay, good. So when I teach the Near Eastern Studies class at the Jerusalem Center, I make my students memorize a lot of the features of the land of Israel. And one of the things that they have to memorize is the 5 north-south components of the land, which are the coastal plain from north to south. That would be kind of out here. And then the low hills, called the Shpela, not Shephelah, it's Shpela. And that's right here. And then the high hill country where Jerusalem is, which would be right along that ridge from Hebron to Jerusalem and north to Shechem. And then the wilderness as it falls off, which would be right here on the rain shadow side of everything, the wilderness. And then the actual valley bottom itself, the Jordan Valley. Sometimes I'll make them do 6 and memorize, the Transjordanian Highlands, but the 5 is what we charge them with knowing. Okay? And our BYU Jerusalem Center trips go at least twice down this, sometimes 3 times if you're going to the Red Sea to snorkel. And one is when we go down to visit Jericho, and another one is when we go down to visit Masada, which is about here. And we also stop and snorkel at Engedi, or not snorkel, but we float in the Dead Sea. But very often groups will also go further south, essentially following Lehi's Trail, but in a bus, and go all the way to the Gulf of Aqaba and the Israeli city of Eilat, where they can do some snorkeling in the Red Sea. So we have that opportunity to get involved. Now, the other thing I was going to tell you about that shot right there, and this is political, but everything is spiritual to the Lord, so that shot was taken before the famous 6-Day War of 1967, which means that all this area that is now controlled by Israel, from East Jerusalem south to Hebron, and from East Jerusalem north to through what we call Samaria, was all part of the country of Jordan. It wasn't an independent state. There wasn't any independent state of Palestine. Jordan had annexed that territory, and it was called the territories of Jordan west of the Jordan River. So they called it the West Bank area, as opposed to what was east of the Jordan River, which was the East Bank area of the Jordan. But in June of 1967, the Israelis, in a rather decisive and quick war that lasted only a few days, 6 days, captured all of the West Bank of the state of Jordan, and still control it now. More or less, there is an independent Palestinian authority that's been set up that controls certain parts of it. It's all a very convoluted political situation. But this picture actually was when Israel was just the coastal area, amazingly. And I remember, that happened when I was in junior high and lived to see, the changes going on in the Middle East. This map here shows, with an artificial line here, the boundary of the so-called West Bank, and there's Jerusalem, west and east, here around Samaria. Now what you can see on this map that's kind of interesting is, and this is actually a space shuttle digital photograph. This particular map shows you a view from outer space of the land of Israel, and you can see that you've got big areas that are like developed cities. See the huge megapolis of Tel Aviv along here, where you don't see anything that looks green because it's all streets and highways. And you could see it around Jerusalem too if I didn't have it circled red there. This is the Gaza Strip. Notice that the areas that we think of as the Palestinian areas, the areas in the West Bank here and also in the Gaza, aren't as green as the areas that are within the boundaries of the state of Israel proper. And that's for two reasons. Number one, the farming methods in Israel are much, much different than the traditional farming methods of the Arabs, okay? And number two, Israel has reforested everything within their international borders. Meaning that when you go, say, on a drive through the countryside of Israel, it looks like you're, in some places, like you could be in Yellowstone. Literally, there's pine trees everywhere. If it's not farmed land, they've planted evergreens on it. And the drive up to Jerusalem is beautiful because there's evergreen forests on both sides of the road. But they have not reforested the areas that are not part of the state of Israel proper. These are the territories that Israel controls, but they're not Israel proper. And so the hills south of Jerusalem are not reforested the way that the hills of the Shfela, low Piedmont area is. And you can see that from space. You can see the difference. The same is true in Jordan. They have not reforested anywhere near to the extent that the Israelis have. And you can see that. You can see right where it stops at the international border there. It's really kind of amazing. You can also see that the Dead Sea is essentially dried up. See, the Dead Sea now, this is a shot from around 2001. The Dead Sea is totally dry at the south end. There's the Lisan, or the tongue. But the connection between them, there is water. See, those are evaporation pans. Because both the Israelis and the Jordanians have mineral extraction businesses, industries at the south end of the Dead Sea. But instead of extracting minerals from what used to be the southern bay of the Dead Sea, they have been forced to bring water through a canal from the deep North Bay and keep very, very shallow mineral extraction pans going so that the industry can keep up. So anyway, what the Dead Sea looks like today is not what it looks like on the Bible map, because you don't have that dark, actually lake look down here in the south. Well, that's just a little bit about the geography of the land so that you can get a feel for it like Lehi would have had. Kevin?
Has it filled up at all since this season?
We've had a very good wet year in Israel, and the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee, which is to the north off the picture here, is at its highest level since since about 2002 or 3. It's filled right up. And they are now, the Jordan River is flowing fully now and emptying into the Dead Sea. But it would take 20 years like that to begin to fill it back up to the point where that bridge would be crossed and it would start going into the southern pans. And now probably both Israel and Jordan would agree to block it because they've got this industry down there. The idea of the Dead Sea growing back to what it was is improbable in the foreseeable future unless they have horrendous winters for the next 20 years and they decide that they don't need those mineral extraction industries, which they do. Both Jordan and Israel, these are some of the most lucrative income sources for both countries. Okay, so much for that. As you're going down on that road to the Jordan Valley, right there, at a point right about there, you'll hit sea level. And then you're going below sea level from that point on. And there, of course, is a picture of the old sea level sign. It used to look like this in the old days, just after the Israelis conquered the West Bank. Just a marker by the side of the road. The marker was put there by the British in the 1920s. But they moved the marker off to a place where you can get off and ride a camel. And so now, you see that you're at sea level, and yet you're still a few miles away from the Dead Sea, which is over those hills. And look how nice they look. You can't reforest that. That's wilderness. Even the lizards carry canteens. There's a shot. This is my daughter, by the way, just so you'll know why I kind of favor her. Also one of our students at Jerusalem, so legitimately say this is a student. Standing out there in the wilderness of Judah, and this is just a few miles east of Jerusalem. Just a few miles, and yet instead of green, it's tan, I suppose. This is a January shot. Okay? Notice there's no coat involved here. When you go down in sea level from Jerusalem in January, where the daytime temperatures might be 50 degrees, you'll be 70 degrees in the wilderness. It will be 75 at Jericho. It's because it's so much warmer and beautiful. This is what the riverways look like in the wilderness. You know, we would call them an arroyo here, probably in Southwest, American speak. We call them a wadi in Arabic, or a nahal in Hebrew, and these are the deep, deep wadis that cut through the wilderness and carry the rainwater that falls in the hills all the way down to the Jordan River and the Dead Sea. Now that's what Israel looks like over here, right about there. In fact, this is out in the Shpela. This is a place where I excavate. That's the place of ancient Gath where Goliath lived. Tel Asafi. That's an April picture. Okay, take a look at that. Green, where the grass is growing on the tell, and at the bottom the field is ripe with wheat. And this is the nature of the land of Israel. It's the field is white, all ready to harvest, kind of a thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful land of milk and honey and bread, and etc. But like we say, the other side, when you move from here to here, the difference is day and other day. It's desert as opposed to lush agricultural land. And that's the nature of the land of Israel. Okay? The wilderness on one side of Jerusalem and the lush, beautiful, verdant forests and fields on the other side. Okay, so this is more or less the same shot, but now that's 1982. I just thought I would show you how long I've been doing this. Okay. You're not the first that we've taken. In fact, you can see that we've got kind of 80s hairdos there. And I haven't changed much, except that I don't wear a 32 waist anymore. But it's the same wilderness and the same beautiful experience going down there to the Dead Sea. And we have two different words for wilderness in the Hebrew Bible. One is midbar, okay? And the other is yeshimon. And this is something that I think is at play in Nephi's text. Even though we only have the text in English translation, I suggest that these two different Hebrew terms that are both translated as wilderness in the King James Bible are probably at work in Nephi's narrative. Here's why. In this picture, you can see what we would call Midbar. The Midbar Yehuda, the wilderness of Judah. And what this is a place where you can graze animals, actually. Because although there's no forests there, the upper areas of the rain shadow still get enough rain, 2 or 3 inches a year, for grass to grow in January and February. And those hills are covered with just a very light covering of green grass in January and February. This is actually taken in July, so you can't see that. I don't know if I've got a January picture in here. But the desert Bedouins, still today, will take their sheep out to the wilderness and graze them on those very small grasses in January and February because it's so rainy around Jerusalem. But come about April and May, those grasses all burn off in the wilderness and it looks like that. But the Midbar wilderness is the kind where you have a little rain and where you have a little bit of growth and where actually human life is sustainable. Humans can live in the wilderness desert if it's midbar. And that's because there are some small rivers that run through it, okay? Rivers that are no wider than this about, okay? They carry rainwater or water running out of springs, but they carry them through the desert. And as a result, you can have a monastery like St. George's Monastery, built into the side of the walls of the wilderness wadis, the big cliffs there, because there is a very, very narrow stream that runs at the bottom of that wadi. And where the stream runs, you can see it's green. And the palm trees down there grow roots and tap into the subterranean water that's in the stream bed. And that's the nature of midbar. You can have a minimum human sustaining of life in this type of wilderness. In the other type of wilderness, no such thing. If you get to Yeshimon, and by the way, that word actually appears in your King James Bible, except everything in the King James Bible, it starts with a Y, and in Hebrew starts with a J in King James. So it's called Jeshimon. And it talks about Moses and the Israelites going through Jeshimon and wanting to get through it because it's horrible. Yeshimon is wilderness where human life is unsustainable, where there is no water, where there is no vegetation for any type of animal to eat any time of the year. It is just baked, horrible, moonscape wilderness, total desert. Now, Yeshimon is like this. This is out as you go into a militarily controlled area between Israel and Jordan. And it has left, this is about 1,000 feet below sea level, and it's left the area where you get any rain at all. And you can see what it's like. There's just nothing there. It is, it's bleak. You don't even want to be there. It is my opinion, as a long-time person who's worked with this stuff, that this is what Lehi, and also then Nephi, who's reporting the event, describes as dreary wilderness. Not merely wilderness, but dreary wilderness. Remember in Lehi's dream, he thinks I was in a dark and dreary wilderness. We'll talk about why dark in a minute, but this is probably the dreary wilderness. And then at a certain point, you get out of that dreary wilderness and you get to where you see a river of water and a tree growing at the end of it. So you've gone from Yeshimon to a place where it's sustainable, midbar again. Well, we'll come back to that, but just so you have those images in your mind. Did I send you this map yet? This is one of the maps that I created for an article of just a very simple dotted line map of Lehi's most likely. Again, I have to qualify this by saying that considering all the options that exist and all of the geographical and even archaeological realities that we take into consideration, this is the most likely trail of Lehi through the wilderness out of Jerusalem to the Red Sea. And here's the picture on the map we just saw there. It would be Jerusalem, and we're coming out of there and going south all the way through the Arabah wilderness to the Gulf of Aqaba, and then down the eastern side of the Gulf to a site that Lehi called the Valley of Lemuel. And I map it coming down to En-Gedi because that was a well-known travel route, and then south from En-Gedi along the western shore of the Dead Sea and through the Arabah Valley, which is bleak at times, and then you get to an oasis, and then it's bleak for a while, and you get to an oasis, and bleak for a while, and you get to the oasis. Finally to the Red Sea, where there are two cities now, the Israeli city of Eilat and the older Jordanian city of Aqaba. And then coming down, once you've reached that, another 50 miles or so to a spot that I think is a likely candidate for stopping and finding a wadi there in the desert that Lehi would have called Lemuel, the Valley of Lemuel. So there you can see from the satellite picture, and here now you can see the delta of Egypt and the Nile. Okay? There you can see how it would work here and the line map. Now I sent you, okay, another map of that. Maybe you've looked at it. We'll look at it later, but I already sent you some PDFs of these things.
We talked about possibility of them crossing paths with other people, or did they take like a route that no one else would take?
No, this was a well-known route, and you know, I'm absolutely sure that they met considerable number of people, at least on the way to the Red Sea. I don't think that the Valley of Lemuel was a place where there were lots of people hanging out. You don't get that impression in the text either. But the trip going there was a well-known travel route. If I said I went to Los Angeles, you wouldn't necessarily assume that I hadn't met anybody on the way. Just, well, I went to Los Angeles. Well, I went to the Red Sea. You don't have to assume that it was a local trip.
Is that also probably why he just says we went to the Red Sea without any explanation, because it was just such a common thing?
Well, it wasn't common for everybody. This was not a trip that everybody would have made. But I speculate that it was not unusual for them to make it.
Yeah.
And we talked about that last week. And I'll get into that a little bit more as we go here, because I got some other visuals I want to show you. But let me back up for a minute and show you something about this site here, the Herodian. This actually is only germane to the story of Lehi because it would be on the way to En-Gedi from Jerusalem. This is a map that more or less shows how what the borders and the land was in New Testament times. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, and the Herodian, where King Herod, the one that killed the babies of Bethlehem, had this huge palace complex out away from Jerusalem, and he built this thing, and it was like his most favorite place to be. It had a 500-yard long, horse racing track there. It had a man-made lake. I mean, everything. And he also built an artificial cone-shaped mountain where he had a mountaintop, a hilltop fortress that was kind of like his bomb shelter. If the land was attacked, he had to leave his lush villa below. He could go up into the hilltop, fortress, which was also quite lavishly built, and hold out there. Herod was a little paranoid in terms of his security. And there's where the Herodian is from Jerusalem. And these are the archaeological remains of it. That's what it looks like. By the way, it's just on the edge of the wilderness. That's why I'm going to show you this picture. It's just on the edge of the wilderness. You can see that it sits to the east of the line of Jerusalem, Bethlehem. Now, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Hebron, which would be down here about where this D is, are right at the top of the hill, all of it. And anything east of those towns falls off to the Dead Sea. And maybe not as abruptly as I have shown it here. But from Bethlehem to Herodian, you go down in elevation probably 500 feet, 600 feet. And by the time you get from Bethlehem, which is very green, to the Herodian, you can see that there's not a lot of forest around. All that you have out there is just some very basic grass that grows. And there are Arab families out there that have flocks and herds, and they use those grasses in the spring. But in the summer, this, by the way, is the man-made lake and Herod's pleasure island there. Some of our students out there. Oh, you got to go do this. Let me just still do that, the Jerusalem program. No, you didn't go to the Herodian?
They closed it off.
They closed off the bottom or the top? So you didn't go to the bottom, but you did go to the top.
Yeah.
Well, then you could see it from afar, right? Yeah. I think Frank told me that they had done that. Top. Yeah, I know the guy that runs the excavation. What do you know? His name, by the way, is Yaakov Kalman, the guy who runs it. And you're going to read his name because it's in this article this week. He also is one of the Israeli archaeologists that works at Kirbet Begalay, and who thinks it's absolutely stupid that Mormons think this has anything to do with the Book of Mormon. And he's right, but I'll leave that for later. This is what it looks like in the summer. And you can see the grasses have gone brown. Sheep can still eat brown grass, it's very nutritious, but it's hotter out there. Anyway, if you go up there and you stop at the top there, and you look out east to the Dead Sea area, this is the view. Okay? And there's the Dead Sea. Can you see that blue there? Try not to look at it, actually. She's stunning, but try not to. Try to look at she's pointing out toward the wadis that go down through the wilderness and actually come out at the shore of the Dead Sea. And it's one particular wadi that we call in Hebrew the Nahal Arugod, that was the main wadi roadway or travelway from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea and to the Red Sea in those days. And what you would do is you would come down here to the east of what eventually would be the Herodian and follow this side of that hill until you got there, and then you would go down that wadi to En-Gedi. I have hiked that, okay? It's very, very easily passable, kind of a fun hike. They don't let anybody do it now. It's in the West Bank, and Elon has a cow if you do anything in the West Bank. But in the old days, I used to hike it even with the Boy Scouts because I ran the Jerusalem Boy Scout tour, and they wouldn't let students go there. But since I had a budget, the Boy Scouts, I took the Boy Scouts. We went and researched what was probably the trail, not only of Lehi, but all kinds of biblical peoples, as Jerusalem to En-Gedi. And it's right on the shore of the Dead Sea. That, by the way, is Moab over there. Those are the mountains of Moab in what is now the state of Jordan. And Machaerus would be right about there, for those of you that went to Machaerus in Jordan. Notice, if you will, how the minimally sustainable area in the wilderness here becomes less grassy as you go east and down toward the Dead Sea. There are places where you go from Midbar to Yeshimon. But as long as you're in one of the wadis where the rainwater forms a little river, or where a spring from a subterranean water source forms a river, you're always going to be able to sustain human life. That's just the way of the desert. Where there's water, there's life. So we come down toward En-Gedi, and then here's the other end of it. Okay, I could show you lots of that, but here's the other end of it. As you come down from those hills, you come down here through that wadi right there, and you follow that river right down to, I'm on the roadside here, taking a picture here at En-Gedi, and it tells you that if you turn left, you head straight south to Eilat, at the Red Sea. This is the likely terrain that Lehi and Nephi and the whole family would have seen as they're going from Jerusalem to the Red Sea and back for all those trips, you know, through the deserts like this when you're up in the hills closer to Bethlehem and Jerusalem, and then as you're down at the Dead Sea coming out of that big, big valley, the Dead Sea shore area. Okay, and so from En-Gedi southward until you get to the end of the Dead Sea, and then south through the long valley to the Red Sea. Here's the map that I sent you. Okay, you all have a PDF of this now. It's the same thing, except that I've sent you two versions. One where you have just the labels telling you where stuff is, and two where you have little annotations out of Scripture. For example, from location 1 to location 2, I've noted there, is 330 kilometers, or 200 miles. It's a 10 to 12 day travel time on foot. How do I know? Because I walked it. Not all at once either. Once a semester we would do a 20-mile hike. And what we found was, even in modern times doing this, me and my colleague Kelly Ogden did this back in the 1980s. And boy, are there some adventures to tell you from that old trip. But what we found was that the logical way for us to do it was to go from gas station to gas station. Anywhere from about 16 to 23 miles apart. Because the gas stations were built at the ancient oases. Now this would be probably how Lehi would travel, or the whole group. You wouldn't go just, we gotta go 20 miles today and we gotta stop. No, you would go from water to water. And that way you'd make the trip. Going from water to water, it's 10 days if you're walking. But since there's a Sabbath in there somewhere, for Israelites, they would probably rest at the oasis on the Sabbath and not travel. And I can tell you after walking a few days at 20 miles apiece through the desert that you're ready for a day off anyway. So it's 200 miles, it's 200 miles from here, past En-Gedi, down to here. And then from location 2 on the shore of the Red Sea to location 3, which would be a possibility for the Valley of Lemuel, at a site in Saudi Arabia called Bir Marsha. That would be another 50 miles, 85 kilometers, which can be done in 2.5 days. Now, when you remember what Nephi says, he said, we did go from Jerusalem to the borders which are near the Red Sea. We came down to the borders near the Red Sea. Notice he doesn't say we came down to the Red Sea. He came down to the borders near the Red Sea. That's in chapter 2. Then he says, and then we traveled in the borders nearer the Red Sea. It's an interesting difference. He came down the borders near the Red Sea in 1 Nephi 2, 5a. And then when he traveled in the wilderness in the borders which are nearer the Red Sea in 2.5b, in other words, after arriving in the borders near the Red Sea, they travel nearer the Red Sea. My reading of that, and a number of people's reading, by the way, it's not just me, thinks that they're actually traveling along the seashore at that point. And when he had traveled 3 days in the wilderness, he pitched his valley in a tent. Okay? So you go 1, 2, and on the 3rd day you arrive at your site, 20, 40, 50 miles. And you pitch your tent in a valley where there was a river of water, because you can't live where there's not water. And that dictated. So that's kind of why I sent you that map to kind of show you the component. Now, as you pointed out, Nephi talks about coming down to the Red Sea like, ba-doop, it's nothing. So a lot of Mormons have read this passage in 1 Nephi 2 and thought that the whole trip took 3 days. Because if you're not reading that verse carefully, he says, well, he came down to the borders near the Red Sea and then traveled 3 days in the wilderness and the borders near the Red Sea and you got the Valley of Lemon. You say, well, it took 3 days to get from Jerusalem to the Valley of Lemon. No. When you break that down into its component parts, it's however long it takes to get to the borders of the Red Sea, and then 3 days in the borders nearer the Red Sea. Now, if you're living in Joseph Smith or even Brigham Young's time, you don't know that geography because nobody did this. But if you're living now and you think I'm going to Jerusalem to the Red Sea, you know that it is not a 3-day trip. Okay? Not on foot. It's a 1-day trip in a car. You can drive it about 6 hours. 4.5 if actually your bus driver's crazy. But it's a long 10-day trip, anciently. So clearly, this is part 1, coming to the borders near the Red Sea, and this is part 2, 3 days in the wilderness and the borders nearer the Red Sea. And that's part of understanding the spatial component of this. Now I want to break here for a minute, but let me just show you what stuff is like on that trip. And a few of you have made this trip. I have made this trip probably 100 times. It never gets old to me. I cannot go to sleep on this trip, as so many people do. If they're riding in a vehicle, it's easy to go to sleep. My eyes are always out the window. I'm always going, wow, this is incredible. This is territory through which Moses and the Israelites traveled, because they were in this area. And this is the area that Nephi traveled through. And boy, how, it's visually stunning at sometimes, but you get outside your bus and you go, this is really desolate. It really is. And the only place that's not desolate are these gas stations. By the way, some of you will recognize the Jerusalem Orient tourist travel buses. This is a gas station, Paz gas station. We call them a yellow because they paint themselves yellow. And it's growing where there is growing. It was built where there was water. The Israelis have taken advantage of all the oases along this whole trail to the Red Sea, and they have built kibbutzes, or at the very least, gas stations and travel stops at all these places along the road. There's another one where I like to stop for ice cream. And if otherwise, this is what it looks like there. This is actually just a little bit up in the hills from that valley. Many of our students go to a place, a kibbutz down there called Kibbutz Keturah, and enjoy a moment in the wilderness there. We have friends at this kibbutz, and they take us on a wilderness experience, and we go out in the wilderness, and the students will sit there like the sheep in the desert and read in their Book of Mormon. It's an amazing opportunity. We usually do this on our trip to Egypt and the Sinai, so if a few of you didn't get to go to Keturah, it will be because you got to go to Turkey instead. Pretty remarkable stuff. Anyway, you see some stunning scenery on this trip to the Red Sea, and every once in a while you can tell that you are in a valley where although it's desert, 3 feet below there's a water table, because you got the trees and stuff going on. And here we're getting nearer the Red Sea, so near the Red Sea that you can smell the water, as a matter of fact. And let me stop right here, because last week I told you about the metal producing side of timber. Okay. So let's pick it up when we come back. Let's break for 4 minutes, and then I want to take you to the Valley of